This is the first in a series on one of the most important foundational teachings and formulations for meditation in Theravada Buddhism, the Foundations of Mindfulness. Sometimes you'll hear it called the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. In the Pali language, Satipatthana. This first session is an introduction and an overview. If you're interested in the texts, it can be found in the middle-length discourses of the Pali Suttas. It's Sutta number 10, known as the Satipatthana Sutta, Foundations of Mindfulness discourse. Another version of it called the Maha, Great Satipatthana Sutta, is found in the long discourses. It's identical, except there is one section that's expanded. In order to get a good feeling and understanding for how we approach the various ways in which the foundations of mindfulness are taught and practiced, we need to back up and spend a few moments just reviewing the ways in which meditation in general is taught in the Theravada tradition. As a generalization, and this is a gross generalization, the paths of meditation tend to be divided into two groups. There's the path of samadhi, which is translated as concentration, and there's the path of mindfulness and insight. And those tend to be separated out, although there's some overlap between them. The path of samadhi is concerned mostly with stabilizing and steadying and calming the mind. And the path of insight and mindfulness is taught many, many ways. The Satipatthana Sutta falls broadly in that camp, in that group of practices that's more insight-oriented. However, you can't really separate these out. If you are focusing on samadhi-type practices, and you'll hear samadhi and jhana is a level or degree or a type of samadhi. Those practices, we do certain techniques or methods to steady and stabilize the mind, but you'll still need all the skills and tools of mindfulness and insight and discernment for all the times when you cannot concentrate or difficulties come up or you're suffering in some way. And so we need to bring all those tools in. So even if you consider that you're really focusing as a samadhi meditator, you need all the tools and approaches of the insight side of the practice. Similarly, if you think you're a mindfulness or an insight meditator, you still need to have some degree of stability so that your mind is not scattered all over the place. So depending on how the insight and mindfulness practices are taught, there is quite a range of emphasis, amount and degrees of emphasis on how much you tend to the samadhi side of the practice. So we'll bring that in and discuss that as we go through all the different methods and techniques, because each one that's laid out can be practiced in a range of ways, or taught commonly in a range of ways. And so we want to see for ourselves, and we'll talk about this in a lot of detail, about how much we consciously bring in the samadhi side or tend to just mostly emphasize the mindfulness side. So that will be clearer as we progress. So the Satipatthana Sutta, the Foundation of Mindfulness, is divided into four groups of practices. There are practices, the first group are mindfulness of the body practices. The second group is called in Pali Vedana with a V, which is, they translate it as feeling or feeling tone, but it's not feelings like moods and emotions. It's referring to the pleasant and unpleasant characteristic that accompanies all experiences. So there's practices to actually pay attention mindfully with pleasantness and unpleasantness. That's the second group. The third group are states of mind. For example, is your mind concentrated or not concentrated? Does it feel contracted or expanded? There's a whole list that we'll go through. And then the fourth group contains a number of lists of a lot of other kinds of practices and ways. I won't get into the details now to apply mindfulness. It's quite detailed. So we're going to work through all of these step by step. The first step will be, as I said, it's mindfulness of the body. And that's divided into six groups, six subgroups, 6 ways of practicing mindfulness of the body. So we'll begin by working through each one of those. Throughout all of these practices, there's a common refrain, or what we call a stock passage, stock standard phrase that gets repeated at the end of each practice. So, for example, for each of the mindfulness of the body practices, you do the practice and then you're given some specific instructions. So, for example, the very first body practice is mindfulness of your breathing, and there's some specific instructions there, and it tells you how to be mindful. And then it adds a piece. It says, in this way, this is how you're mindful of the body internally or externally, or internally and externally. Or you notice the arising or passing away, in other words, the changing nature of the experience. Or you bring just bare mindfulness to, in this example, of breathing. And then, so that passage is repeated again, accompanying each of the different practices that we'll go through. And for each of them, we'll slow down and take time to notice, what does it mean for this particular practice to experience it internally? What does it mean to experience it externally, and both internally and externally? What does it mean to notice the arising or passing away? These are different choice points you have, or just bare mindfulness. And then that standard passage ends by saying, this is how you abide independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Independent doesn't mean disconnected, because this practice is about connecting, right? We're bringing our mindfulness in very specific ways to connect with experience. So it's about connecting, but being disentangled from things, where our well-being, our inner composure, our equanimity is not at the effect of things. That's the independent, not clinging to anything in the world. So that is really the aim and the goal for all of the practices of the sutta. Independent, not clinging to anything in the world. You're not expected to, and you actually cannot do all of these practices. So it's giving us a big range of practices. Some of them, as you will see, work together and support each other, and some of them don't really fit so obviously with other practices, and they may be their own standalone practice. So we'll talk about that as we move through each one. So don't try to do them all. You don't have to memorize everything. The way I suggest approaching this is hear all of these practices, reflect on them, and some of them you will naturally relate to more than others. That's the starting point. And as I mentioned earlier, for each one of the practices, not only will you relate to different ones, but there's different ways to work at each of these steps. And you'll find the own way you want to work and relate with each one. So that's the basic overview. And in the next session, we'll begin with the very first practice, mindfulness of breathing.